Millions were dead, and whole empires had vanished. The trauma of the First World War was so profound that when the guns finally fell silent on the 11th hour of November 11th, 1918, the survivors shared a singular, desperate goal: ensuring a war like this could never happen again. The resulting Treaty of Versailles focused on humiliation. It forced Germany to accept massive, unpayable financial reparations and arbitrarily redrew the map of Europe, creating borders that many inhabitants refused to recognize. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson proposed a League of Nations to resolve future disputes through diplomacy. However, the United States Congress immediately voted against joining, choosing a return to isolationism and stripping the new international body of its most powerful potential member. By 1923, the German economy collapsed under the weight of its debts.
The nation entered a period of hyperinflation, an economic spiral where money lost its value so quickly that life savings were wiped out in weeks, leaving ordinary citizens destitute. A fragile recovery in the mid-1920s ended abruptly with the 1929 U.S. stock market crash. The Great Depression spread financial ruin across the globe, and in Germany, the number of unemployed workers surged to 6 million. This widespread economic misery provided fertile ground for extreme nationalist politicians. They promised a return to national strength and began looking for opportunities to challenge a global system they viewed as broken. The first challenge to the international order came from the Pacific. Facing a population boom and a lack of natural resources, Japan's military took a rogue path, invading the Chinese territory of Manchuria in 1931 to seize its coal and grain. The League of Nations issued a formal condemnation, but Japan's response was a blunt rejection of the Assembly's authority. Their delegation simply walked out of the building, proving the League had no power to enforce its own rules. Traumatized by the memories of the Great War, Western democracies were paralyzed by the fear of a new conflict. They adopted a strategy of appeasement, offering political concessions to aggressive regimes in a desperate attempt to maintain the peace. In 1935, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini followed Japan's lead. Driven by a desire to rebuild the Roman Empire, he launched an invasion of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. It was a brutal mismatch of technology. Mussolini's forces used modern artillery, tanks, and aircraft to overwhelm the Abyssinian defenders, even deploying illegal poison gas bombs against soldiers and civilians. Abyssinian Emperor Haile Selassie appealed to the League of Nations for protection, but his plea was ignored. Britain and France refused to act, effectively abandoning a member state to a powerful aggressor. Unchecked aggression in the Pacific and Africa confirmed Adolf Hitler's suspicions. He watched as the League failed every test, concluding that the international community lacked the will to stop a determined military power. After seizing absolute power, Hitler began a secret rearmament program that shattered the limits of the Versailles Treaty. He trebled the size of the German army and established the Luftwaffe, a modern air force that was officially forbidden to exist. France responded to the German buildup with a defensive military mentality. Fearing they lacked the manpower for a mobile war, they focused their resources on the Maginot Line, a massive chain of static fortifications meant to act as an impenetrable shield. This shift toward isolation and defense was tested in 1936, when the Spanish Civil War erupted. A right-wing nationalist coup, led by General Francisco Franco, attempted to overthrow the country's elected Popular Front government. While London and Paris pledged non-intervention, Hitler and Mussolini ignored the agreement. They used the conflict as a proxy war, pouring in tens of thousands of troops, tanks, and bombers to ensure a national victory. Spain became a laboratory for a new type of conflict called blitzkrieg. German pilots practiced coordinating with ground units to strike fast and deep, ruthlessly targeting civilian centers like the town of Guernica to demonstrate the power of modern air warfare. The horrors of the Spanish Civil War deepened the fear in Britain and France, while Hitler and Mussolini emerged convinced that the Western democracies would not fight to protect their allies. In early 1938, Hitler moved against his homeland of Austria. He achieved a bloodless incorporation into the Third Reich while the rest of the world stood by, marking the first time a sovereign nation was erased from the map since the Great War. Hitler's next target was the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Fearing a general European war was imminent, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain traveled to Munich to negotiate a final settlement with the German dictator. Britain and France agreed to the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia in exchange for a meaningless document. Hitler signed the piece of paper, promising he had no further territorial goals, and Chamberlain returned home claiming he had secured peace in our time. The agreement was violated within months. German troops marched into Prague and swallowed the remainder of Czechoslovakia. Appeasement had failed. Despairing at the weakness of the West, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin sought his own arrangement. He signed a shocking pact with his ideological enemy, Adolf Hitler, to divide Poland between them and keep the Soviet Union out of the coming fight. With no threat from the East, Hitler gave the order to attack. On September 1, 1939, German forces thrust into Poland. Britain and France, finally pushed to their limit, declared war. World War II was the culmination of a 20-year slow-motion collapse. From the flaws of Versailles to the unpunished invasions in China and Africa, the democratic powers ignored systemic aggression in the hope of preserving peace, an inaction that ultimately destroyed it.